If you talk to the folks from U.S. Soccer, they would point out that in that collective bargaining agreement, as I understand it from them, the women's soccer team have a guaranteed contract. In other words, whether you play or not, whether you're injured or not, you get that money that is in your contract. Whereas the men, if they don't play, they don't get the money. Now, if you were to get equal pay, would you be willing to give up that guaranteed contract and really be on equal footing with the men?
I think it's okay that the compensation structures are a little bit different. I think our realities are a little bit different. Their MLS season goes the majority of the year. Our NWSL season only goes in the summer. So we're not saying that every single structure has to be the same, but I think from a broad sense, the equity in the contracts have to be the same and what we're able to earn.
You'd be willing to make some concessions on dollar figures for things such as what we just talked about, that guaranteed contract. Is that what I hear you saying?
Kind of. I feel like it's a little bit more complicated an issue of that, given the realities of both, the men's season and our season.
My name is Nathan Laurie. If you are new here, we talk about the law and the facts. If you're about that life, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. What's going on, everybody? You know who I am. My name is Nathan Laurie. I'm here with my buddy Viva Farai from the channel. What's the name of the channel again?
Oh, the thing down here, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Right under that.
That's right.
Anti-media, because it's going to be very, very appropriate for this video.
Oh, so Viva, you know me, I'm like the U.S. soccer guy, even though I really know nothing about U.S. soccer, but I've kind of gotten pulled into this madness of U.S. soccer. So do you know the backstory about this whole U.S. soccer thing?
I know the backstory. A while back, I was going to cover the lawsuit, and I said I didn't really have that much of an interest in the lawsuit itself. You did a video on it, breaking down the federal court decision, which was pretty clear and unequivocal. That one went nuts. Everything you've been doing on the subject has gone nuts. And I won't say everything I know about the subject I've learned from you, but a good deal of it I've learned from you.
Just so everybody understands where we're at, the U.S. women's national team did a documentary, and this documentary was just showing their process from when the equal pay lawsuit. So when they first started, how they won the World Cup, and then their fight for equal pay throughout. Just let's understand some factual findings from the court. So this is the court bringing in all information, and let's understand the factual findings from the court. Nothing else, just facts. Fact number one, the women claimed they were being paid less than the men for the same work. That was false. The court found that the women were actually paid more than the men for playing soccer. The women said too that they were being paid at a lesser rate than the men. So per game, they were being paid less. That also the court found was incorrect. They were actually being paid more per game than the men. And the last fact was that the court found that U.S. soccer was not treating the women or paying the women unequally or discriminating against the women. It found that the women chose the deal that they have now, which paid them more. They rejected the men's deal, and the court found as a matter of fact that and it's true that the women would have been paid more under the men's deal, but as a matter of fact, the men's team would have been paid more under the women's deal. So both teams, if they switched deals, they would have been paid more under the opposite deal. And the last piece of fact that I have that was not found by the court, but is absolutely true, is that when COVID hit, U.S. soccer canceled all games during COVID. So the U.S. women's soccer teams, their main argument was that if we were paid like the men, we would have been paid $6 million more for winning the World Cup. And that performance matters. But you guys have to understand this. Last year for COVID, there were no games. There was no performance. 0 games. The women got paid $100,000 salaries. 20 players with $100,000 salaries. We came out to something like $4 million. The women's team got paid, while the men's team got absolutely nothing.
The women's soccer team have a guaranteed contract. In other words, whether you play or not, whether you're injured or not, you get that money that is in your contract. Whereas the men, if they don't play, they don't get the money. Now, if you were to get equal pay, would you be willing to give up that guaranteed contract and really be on equal footing with the men?
So the men's team, because they were on a pay-to-play schedule, they got paid zilch, nothing. The women got paid millions of dollars last year. So if we're talking about unequal pay, then the men's team, who got nothing I think, have a better chance of having unequal pay than the women's team who got millions of dollars last year. Go ahead.
Just wait for the argument, and to steelman it, what the women's team is going to say is that if we amortize what the men got overpaid in the previous years, setting aside force majeure, amortize it, they still got more over whatever time frame they're going to measure it on. But it is the argument that people should appreciate. The men's team got paid zero last year, and the women's team, because of their guaranteed payment under the contract that they negotiated for good and valuable consideration, did in fact get paid.
Now, this brings us to CNN. So let's look at this. Now, CNN, obviously, because they're trying to promote this film, they want to make sure people watch this film. We're going to watch CNN try to really go after U.S. Soccer's attorney, and the attorney's going to, and we're going to react to the attorney going back and forth. So let me pull it up. So let me stop teasing it to death, because I teased it for like the last 20 minutes.
Streaming now on HBO Max, a deep dive into the U.S. women's national soccer team and their equal pay lawsuit. The film is called LFG, an acronym explained in the opening scenes and an acronym that really became their rally cry. The film tracks the years-long and very public legal battle between the women's national team and their employer, the U.S. Soccer Federation, all playing out in the months leading up to and after their 2019 World Cup victory. Here's a clip.
We believe at U.S. Soccer that all female athletes deserve fair and equitable pay. One nation, one team, go USA!
I wish that he would have, in the Federation, frankly, would have understood better the moment and the potential that they had to kind of flip the script going forward, because I think they could have come out looking like heroes as well, to be able to stand on the steps of City Hall and being like, we're going to do this with our team. Obviously, they weren't prepared to do that, and they didn't do that.
Now, that was a beautiful setup, right? They set that up nice. Make you feel sorry for them. Equal pay, equal pay. You feel like I felt sorry for them watching that setup. What do you think?
They had a moment to step up and flip the script. Now, incidentally, that's flip the script is one of my not trigger words, but it's one of the catchphrases that I like to know that I'm going to get bamboozled when someone says let's flip the script. It's a term that has a specific meaning, and it's used in certain contexts, and this is that context.
Obviously, they weren't prepared to do that, and they didn't do that.
LFG was produced by CNN Films. It will air on CNN this fall.
So do you think that was enough of the disclaimer to say we paid for the movie and we're helping distribute it?
Not only that, but they're playing the shell game, right? They're saying produced by CNN Films, which might lead you to believe that that's something of a meaningful separate entity from CNN, the news network. I mean, you are playing a shell game where it is documenting, it's producing its own documentary, it's investigating itself, and now it's reporting on its findings. That it
the news media today at its finest.
This is Jamie Wine. She's a trial attorney at Latham & Watkins who represents the U.S. Soccer Federation. Thank you for being here. USSF has made clear that they are not happy with the film, in part because they say that their views were not accurately represented. Why didn't, Jamie, then the U.S. Soccer Federation agree to an on-camera interview to be part of the film?
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me. We're happy for this opportunity. You know, the filmmakers had been working on the film for over a year with the women's team and their lawyers. And the producers came to us only in the last few weeks in their process. We didn't feel it was a fair opportunity to present our side of the story. And most importantly, all of the facts are in the public record and were available to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of important. Let's take for granted that what the lawyer is saying is accurate. Is that they're saying that producing the movie for a year, putting it together for a year, and then they only come to the USSF at the tail end of the production. So one can only imagine as to what the intent would be of including them in the production at that stage of it. But for anybody who's never had the mainstream media take what you said out of context, if you agree to sit down to do a documentary that's produced by the entity that has the agenda to promote its own agenda in this, and you expect them to depict your position or portray your position accurately, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah, and let's not forget too, one thing about that documentary, I've watched it. They don't mention any of the court's findings in detail, right? Instead of saying the women's team got paid more than the men's team, they say some of the women got paid more than some of the men. It's very well done in a sense of to make you feel like the judge got it wrong, right? They didn't say, well, as a factual finding, the women got paid more per game. As a factual finding, the women got paid more overall. As a factual finding, the court found that these allegations were false. They don't say any of that. And going into it, I think this lawyer is right by saying these are all public documents. The court findings are all public documents, and they didn't mention any of that in this documentary. And then to come to me at the last 2 weeks and say, we want to get your side of the story. Our side of the story is what the judge said. The judge said our side of the story, right? He agreed with us.
But anybody who's had the experience, you just know how easy it is when you have a motivated documentary being produced. Sit down. I just want to talk to you, and they're going to take one sentence somewhat out of context just to promote what they want to promote or to demonize who they want to demonize, and set it, barring certain conditions for the interview, no editing, a certain amount without clips. I mean, yeah, you're wiser to avoid dealing with the enemy than to agree to sit down with them and have no creative control over what they do with the product.
Exactly. Especially when you know that they're motivated in this way.
One question on that. I mean, this is a legal battle that's played out for, a period of months and years. The Soccer Federation is steeped, obviously, in what this battle's about and the issues at hand, and they didn't think that they were prepared to be able to speak on camera about it. I mean, were they scared of something?
What do you think about that question? Or were they scared of something?
Not to go back to my run for office, but I did an interview with the CBC as an adverse party to them. They frame the questions so that the question presupposes a contested conclusion. Or you plant the seed. You suggest that they're scared, which even if they come in and deny it, someone's going to come and say, oh, look at that question. She had to ask them if they were scared. It's a loaded bull garbage question that can only be asked by a partisan media that's trying to sell their own product. But anyways, she does a good job responding. We just won in federal court. We won in federal court. Are we scared of something? I mean, it's such a preposterous question that it's laughable on its face. It's a good thing she didn't laugh because she treats the question with respect, which others might not have done.
And look at the stain on this woman's face, on the interviewer's face.
No, absolutely prepared. And really the concern with whether or not this was really going to be a fair documentary or one-sided. And as it turned out, as you mentioned, U.S. Soccer is disappointed with the film, and just to underscore why, the most important fact here, which got only the briefest mention at the end of the film, is that a federal district court judge has ruled that U.S. Soccer does pay the women players equally, and in fact has paid them more overall and on a per game basis. So it's simply just not true that the women players had to play and win more to get their pay, and it's not true that they weren't paid equally by U.S. Soccer.
Let's get
boom.
When people go back to watch that again, look at the reporter's stone cold face as the lawyer is standing there. She's trying not to gag on her own rubbish. Okay, I asked the question. Stay stone faced, and pretend not to be shattered by that response.
To that what the issue is at hand, I do want to read though a statement from the filmmakers about this. The filmmakers, they write.
Now hold on. So everybody understands, these filmmakers were paid to produce this film by CNN. So
LFG was produced by CNN Films. It will air on CNN this fall.
Filmmakers to which she's referring is CNN Films.
Yes.
We're the filmmakers. But they don't want to call it. We don't say, we asked our own employees what they had to say about the movie. We're the filmmakers. Let's what's the word? Anonymize them. Let's make them seem like an independent entity. Yeah. We asked ourselves what we thought of it, and we agreed with ourselves.
So let's see what the LFG filmmakers, the film made by CNN and produced by CNN, is going to be on CNN this fall. Let's see what they say.
Spent over 2 years researching myriad court documents, public records, and other relevant materials, and obtaining firsthand accounts related to the U.S. women's national team players' experiences and struggle to obtain equal pay from their employer, U.S. Soccer. We engaged with U.S. Soccer to ensure we understand their position on the dispute and provided ample time for participation on camera, and they declined.
But hold on, I want to go back just that one clip. Look at this: the struggle to obtain equal pay from their employers. This is not a fair documentary, right? Because look at the way they're framing the question.
They are framing it to presuppose the conclusion that was found to be factually incorrect and legally incorrect by a federal court judge. They might disagree with it and they might have the intention to appeal it, but the framing of that description presupposes the very conclusion that was already disregarded and found to be factually and legally incorrect by a judge. So
yes,
that's a fair phrasing of the issue.
Here we go.
Provided ample time for participation on camera, and they declined. We stand behind the documentary and its goal of bringing this story to the fore and illuminating the ongoing fight for gender equality and wage parity.
So this was not a documentary seeking truth. This was a documentary seeking to tell a story, a one-sided story about equal pay. Right? These women are being unfairly paid, and we want to show that on this film. Do you agree with that?
You'll notice here, and it's a very subtle shift. Bring the screen back up just so that people can read this. It's a very subtle shift. We stand behind the documentary and its goal of bringing this story to the fore and illuminating the ongoing fight for gender equality and wage parity at large. And this, you'll notice how they shift from the specific story to promoting a broader narrative. Now, they might feel, and there may in fact be gender inequality in pay in other fields, but it has been found from a court to not be the case for U.S. soccer. But now they say, well, the goal of the documentary is just to bring out these greater social issues that have found to be not applicable to the U.S. soccer. I mean, it's such a subtle shift that they basically say here, setting aside whether or not we're factually correct on the U.S. soccer issue, we want to bring out the broader issue of gender equality and wage parity. And that's basically saying, even if it didn't apply in this case, we still believe it to be true in general. So we are basically morally justified in using this example, even though it doesn't apply, in order to promote that story, that narrative at large. And it's no real difference than, when people invoke the hoaxes. Say, okay, well, this is the hoax, but racism still exists. So even though this case of a racist hoax was a hoax, well, we stand by the fact that in general there's racism, and this might not have been the best example. So it's the classic bait and switch. Now that they've determined that this particular case is not the good example, but they're going to promote the broader narrative, which is still disputed among certain milieus.
These facts are what I'm about to say right now is undisputed. The women got paid more from 2015 to 2019, even 2020. They got paid more on a per game basis and overall, meaning their rate of pay was higher than the men's team. Not that it was at 220 versus 212, but their rate of pay was higher. The amount they got in aggregate was higher. So it didn't matter about how many games were being played. The women were getting paid more per game and they had guaranteed money. So they were well off, better than the men. And now going on from the rest of this interview, listen to how the CNN anchor seems to not even care about those facts.
Let's get to that issue. This is about equal pay. These athletes allege that they were not paid as much as men. Overall, they say the rate of pay is lower than for them than the men, and the women win more. So what does U.S. Soccer say?
Just understand that is false. It's a fact. It's a fact that that's a false statement which she just made. So she's saying something that's absolutely false. But let's let the attorney run it out.
Sure. As I just said, the judge considered that very argument by the women's team and rejected it. He found that U.S. Soccer has paid the women equally, and as I said, in fact, more than the men's team. And what's really interesting is if you look at the structures of how the men's team and the women's team are paid, these are structures that each team negotiated through their collective bargaining process. If you look at the structure, the men negotiated and agreed to a system where they get paid only if they play. So literally only if they step on the field and play in a particular game will a male player get paid. The women bargained for and agreed to a different structure that they wanted. And that structure is that they get paid no matter what. They get paid with a guaranteed salary and guaranteed benefits. And we saw this play out most starkly during COVID when nobody was playing any games and the women got paid. They got paid the entire year when all of the games were shut down and the men didn't get paid at all. And it's precisely for these guaranteed salary and benefits that the women did bargain for this structure, and it's why they rejected the men's structure in their collective bargaining negotiations.
I swear to you, Nate, it's only going to be a matter of time before they raise the argument that the men got paid so much more in previous years that justifies why they got nothing during COVID, because hey, they reaped the benefits in previous years and decades. But I predict we'll see if it goes.
But even the previous years, don't forget the court ruling was about previous years, 2015 to 2000, before COVID. So when they got paid more than back then, and then they got paid they got paid millions of dollars more in 2020. So they'd have to go back to like 2014 and say, well, we got paid less in 2014.
No question, they're going to amortize it. They will raise the argument because it's a logical one. If you're going to go there, they're going to amortize what they argue to be the overpayment in previous years to justify why the women got paid something in COVID year and the men got nothing. But
reparations.
The other issue is it's also like I'm trying to think. There's an analogy in casino here, like, if the dealer gets an ace and you want to take back half your bet and then you get blackjack, it's like, well, geez, I just took back half my bet, so I didn't win as much as I could have. I want to put it back now.
Take insurance.
And the women's team, and I think it's very smartly negotiated, a pay per game for all players, whether they step foot on the field or not. So it wasn't just for all the players. It was for everyone on the team, regardless of whether or not they played. It's nice. I mean, it's nice in that it's more communal, in that all the players are going to get paid regardless, which means that even those who play are going to get paid less because they're going to make sure that those who don't play get paid. The men didn't have that. So a male player not good enough to make the field or doesn't play that game, no pay.
If you talk to the folks from U.S. Soccer, they would point out that in that collective bargaining agreement, as I understand it from them, the women's soccer team have a guaranteed contract. In other words, whether you play or not, whether you're injured or not, you get that money that is in your contract. Whereas the men, if they don't play, they don't get the money. Now, if you were to get equal pay, would you be willing to give up that guaranteed contract and really be on equal footing with the men?
I think it's okay that the compensation structures are a little bit different. I think our realities are a little bit different. Their MLS season goes the majority of the year. Our NWSL season only goes in the summer. So we're not saying that every single structure has to be the same, but I think from a broad sense, the equity in the contracts have to be the same and what we're able to earn.
You'd be willing to make some concessions on dollar figures for things such as what we just talked about, that guaranteed contract. Is that what I hear you saying?
Kind of. I feel like it's a little bit more complicated an issue of that, given the realities of both, the men's season and our season.
And so the women's, they agreed to something which was overall guaranteed to minimize or mitigate their risks and other benefits. And then at the end of the day, they said, well, we won and the men didn't. So had we had the men's deal, we would have gotten paid more based on their deal. I mean, that's sort of buyer's remorse only in an ex post facto assessment based on what you actually did that year.
But I think COVID, and as she just mentioned, COVID blows that argument up, because whenever you make a legal argument, you start with the word if. If we would have gotten paid under the men's deal, we'd have made millions of dollars more. But then last year, we can still use that same argument. Well, if you got paid under the men's deal last year, you would have gotten paid zero instead of the millions of dollars you got.
You mentioned it in your last video, but when the U.S. Soccer comes out and says, okay, take the men's deal on going forward, you don't get the same deal. And then the women's team calls it a stunt and a ploy. I'm not wearing the hashtag confession through projection shirt, but when someone calls that offer a ploy or a stunt, you can then sort of surmise what the intentions are behind the person making that accusation.
The way what they say is that when you look at the rate of pay and the structure, they have to do more work, they play more games, they have to win more games in order to make just a little bit more.
That's all lies.
This is why they argue that this is not equal pay.
And again, the federal judge rejected that argument after looking at all of the facts that were submitted by both sides, and rejected it out of hand, saying that there wasn't even enough to go to a trial, and he's dismissed the case.
I mean, they basically said they lost, and then everything they were running in terms of interview and sound bites were basically reiterating the facts that were determined not to be true. So you'd think the judge is just out in total left field. The judge, who was the judge, by the way? I know that we knew the
Klossner.
judge. Say it again.
I think his name is Judge Klossner, I think.
I know we saw this judge in another file where I was surprised that the same judge came out with the same two rulings, but whatever. But, even when they reported on it at the time, the immediate response was the women's soccer team reiterating the same conclusions that were just dismissed by the judge. And that was pretty much all that CNN reported on it. And now they go back to basically ignoring the existence of that judgment, which is a very unfavorable judgment. There's no question about it, because it as far as women's soccer goes, it negates the argument. Whether or not there's still gender inequality in other fields, in other professions, totally separate discussion. But you saw in that sound clip there before how CNN is trying to merge the two, soccer in specific and gender inequality at large, which is what they're trying to promote with the video. 7-minute interview, which was passed off as news, is in fact nothing more than an advertisement for the documentary that CNN itself produced. And it's a full-fledged vortex of fake news, for lack of a better word, or just motivated news, which is propaganda. And it's not even motivated for political purposes. It's motivated for its own financial interests. And it knows what sells among its own viewers, and it knows how to sell it to them in a way that their viewers think they're getting news when they are actually, in fact, just getting motivated propaganda.
Yeah, because the news here was the women lost because the judge found that their allegations were factually incorrect. But that doesn't sell, right? And that's not what their audience wants to hear. The audience wants to hear the judge is wrong. The audience wants to hear this is all. The audience wants to hear something else. But that's the truth. The truth is the women's factual claims were wrong.
The audience wants to hear something that reaffirms the belief that there is systemic discrimination, systemic gender inequality in terms of pay across the board. And this lawsuit was the quintessential example of it when it was brought, when it was filed, and it turned out to be, in fact, factually incorrect, subject to appeal. So what happens when that quintessential example, the perfect example of gender discrimination, gender pay inequality, turns out to be false? Forget about it. Just keep pushing the narrative and broaden the purpose, the stated purpose of the lawsuit itself. It's no longer about gender pay inequality in soccer. For future generations, gender inequality at large. So that's how you just get away from the matter-of-fact loss of the example at issue to bring it over to the broader context of what they know their viewers want to hear, want to see, and want to have reaffirmed in their minds. And that's what they're doing.
But lastly, because you do a show on Fridays, what's it called? Fake Media Fridays. What do you call it again?
Fake News Fridays.
Fake News Fridays.
Anti-media.
Anti-media. I want to ask you, what do you think about the state of media? Because no one in the media is covering the truth on this story, except for us, right? We're the only people who are reading the documents, who are saying, here's, we're literally reporting the documents. We're not really giving opinions on the doc. Now we're giving some opinions, but before it's just like, here's what the document said. Why don't you think the media is reporting this accurately? Because an accurate reporting of this is that their claims were factually false, right? Even to the extent where if you want to, you can actually see the U.S. Soccer Federation, because it's a not-for-profit, their tax returns are public. You can go to their website and download their tax and look at how their tax return filings for the past 6 years or something down there. So you can actually verify these numbers. Why don't you think the media is taking the time to actually correct the record and says, well, hey, these ladies' claims are factually incorrect based on our own findings? We see the documents. I've looked at the documents. It's not hard to find.
Well, first of all, I mean, I no longer expect any truth out of the media. And in fact, when I hear a story from the media, I presume, and more often than not, rightfully so, that the exact opposite is true, or there's material spin in it. But why they don't? Because they've been pushing a story for the last 2 years, or for the duration of this lawsuit, that turned out to be garbage. The same thing with the Russia collusion and MSNBC. They pushed a story that turned out to be factually incorrect, and if they were to report accurately and say we got it wrong, well, that makes them look like idiots. And so you just have to double down. You have to continue with the deceit, and you have to continue with the rage bait reporting, because also that just generates more money, and it generates more clicks, it generates more shares. Rage generates clicks. And if they were to come out and say, yeah, we got it wrong, and finally maybe it's not as big of an issue as we've been saying it is for the last half decade, both with the soccer and the Russia hoax. The Russia gate is a prime example.
Oh yeah.
Well, it undermines all of their credibility, and so you can't do it. So you just have to keep fooling people.
Well, we are not fooled, and hopefully the people who are going to be watching this are not fooled. Viva, before I let you go, tell the people where to find you. Tell them where to go.
You can find us and support us at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You know where to find me on YouTube, Viva Fry. Merch, I love this one. I mean, I've always loved the anti-media shirt. I saw, actually, just to give a shout out to Rebel News, Sheila Gunn Reid, one of the reporters, doing a live stream wearing an anti-media sweater.
Nice.
But Viva Fry, you know where to find me.
Yeah. Hey, listen, thanks again for doing this. And hopefully this is, we got a lot more going on with the women's U.S. soccer team because unfortunately, there's a response, there's an appeal. We got, hearings and all this other stuff that's going to be going on. So I'll keep up to date. I honestly, I have a little fear because I don't know how the appeals court, but I don't know how the appeals court can rule against U.S. soccer because it just doesn't, it just wouldn't make any sense last year, because I think last year really convinced me that it just doesn't seem like they have a legal way out of this, because the men they got paid zero. Like, zero is a hard number to overcome for unequal pay, right? The men, the people who you're saying are being, that they were discriminating for, they're discriminating for men, right? We're giving men the advantage. They got paid nothing. And the women's team got paid million. I don't know how you get over that fact of reality. That's a fact of reality, right?
There's one fact which in and of itself is insurmountable, in my humble opinion. They were offered the same contract and declined. Now, the only way they can say we declined, not being in full awareness of fact and law, is to say we were duped. They concealed material facts. They hid numbers from us. That's not alleged anywhere that I know of.
Yeah.
So the mere fact, and the only fact, that they were offered the same contract and refused it so they could negotiate specific terms and conditions, that ends the lawsuit right there. The fact that it did not turn out to be as lucrative for them, hypothetically, because they won that year, you made your bed and you sleep in it. And unless they're going to argue that they were duped into signing the contract that they negotiated, and they were duped into rejecting the contract that was offered to them, that in and of itself, on its face alone, ends all of the dispute, in my humble opinion.
Well, listen, for Viva, my name is Nate the Lawyer. Thanks. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. We are out of here. Peace.
If you talk to the folks from U.S. Soccer, they would point out that in that collective bargaining agreement, as I understand it from them, the women's soccer team have a guaranteed contract. In other words, whether you play or not, whether you're injured or not, you get that money that is in your contract. Whereas the men, if they don't play, they don't get the money. Now, if you were to get equal pay, would you be willing to give up that guaranteed contract and really be on equal footing with the men?
Kind of.